Okay, everybody got quiet, so I guess we'll start. All right, before I forget, Ben wanted me to remind everybody, evangelism class tomorrow night at 6:30. All right, so there we go. All right, so here is where we are. We got 3 weeks left to go in the quarter. So what we're going to cover tonight and next week, we're going to talk about the digital age. And so that's going to cover a lot of different things. And I feel like this flows really well because a lot of the issues and problems and challenges and difficulties and that we've talked about so far are amplified and magnified and made more difficult because of the digital life that we lead. So tonight we're going to talk mainly about social media, and the reason that we're going to talk about that is because there is just an insane amount of data around social media. So it's very easy to understand what is happening with social media in particular. But a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about applies to a much broader portfolio of digital experiences, right? So a lot of things specifically tonight that we'll talk about could be applicable to video games or even like online shopping and a lot of different ways. So it's certainly not restricted at all specifically to social media. The other thing, in a lot of the slides, I have it phrased specifically as a parent, what can I do for my child? Because to a very great extent, this is primarily driven by parents, right? You're the ones in the house, you're the one setting the rules, you're the one providing devices, and all of those kinds of things. And so that's really the main perspective that we're going to take tonight. But all of us, as we are talking with, grandkids or people that we know here in the congregation, nieces and nephews and all those kinds of things, we can certainly incorporate this into conversations that we're having, things that we're asking about. Hey, what's going on, online today? What are the trends or fads or those kind of things? To have a conversation about what kids are seeing. All right, so before I start, I feel compelled to give a full disclosure on my social media accounts and then what I use so that you can factor that into the discussion that we have tonight. So I use X for news, and I have a LinkedIn account that I hardly ever look at, and that's it. That's what I typically use. I had Facebook, but it's been probably 10 years since I've had any of that. And it's actually kind of annoying not having Facebook because it has become this sort of universal login that you can use everywhere. If you want to use Marketplace, or you end up with a group that communicates all of their information via Facebook, it's kind of annoying. And I bring that up because it can be difficult if you make a decision, or for yourself or for your kids, to try and stay away from social media. It can be hard because there's lots of influences and lots of things that push you to certain places, right? Just to be able to, buy somebody's old kitchen table or whatever you're trying to do. All right. So one of the questions, if you've got, we do have some of the class material in the back. If you didn't pick it up, there should be, I didn't look before, hopefully there's a few left. But one of the, kind of the very first questions, and to sort of set the stage for what we're going to talk about tonight, right? We look at 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 16, and, I look at that, and my takeaway is that the Bible provides guidance for every situation that we can come across in life, right? So obviously there's no book, chapter, and verse, so to speak, that we can turn to that specifically tells us whether we should use Facebook or how much time we should spend on it or any of those things, right? But there are principles that we can look to as we kind of tee this up here, that can help us guide the way that we think about it. And so here's 4 that we'll look at quickly here to get started, and there's more that we'll pick up along the way, but I think this gives us a pretty good flavor. So we'll go ahead and read this if you want to turn to Galatians chapter 5, and we'll read the last 4 verses of the book there, and then just talk for a minute or two about what the key takeaways are for this, and what principle we can pick up here. So Galatians 5, starting in verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. So does anyone have a takeaway or a principle from that we can apply to, kind of our digital life or social media? Go ahead, Kyle.
Just this idea of crucifying the flesh with its passions and desires is an obvious contrast to the fruit of the Spirit, and much of what we see displayed in social media couldn't really be described as having the characteristics of peace or long-suffering or kindness or goodness, and so obviously we have to be very thoughtful about the appeal of social media to the fleshly desires rather than those things that are spiritual.
Yeah, it's super easy to argue if you're inclined to argue, right? Especially if you're someplace that you have, anonymity and nobody really knows who you are, then it becomes very easy to say things to people, on a keyboard or a screen that you wouldn't say to people in real life. I certainly look at verse 26, let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another, right? So a lot of what people post on social media is about themselves, right? And a lot of it is centered around me and the things that I do, and I want other people to see and know what's going on with me. And so some of those things we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful about. Any other thoughts or comments on Galatians? You?
And that can cause envy in other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, for sure. Chris?
I think self-control can be a big one, right? Some people can spend like an inordinate amount of time on social media, or kids with video games, or like you name it. Anything can be done in excess, right?
Right.
It takes a huge amount of your life.
Yeah, so hopefully we get to the discussion about time tonight. Let's go over to Proverbs and look at Proverbs 22. And we'll read the first 4 verses there. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold. The rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. What do we think about that? How would we apply that to the discussion tonight?
Well, we can lose our name, influence.
Yeah, so that's important, right? Our name, our reputation, our ability to influence things for good. One of the things I try to get across to my kids is the internet is forever, right? Once you hit send on whatever it is, whether it's words or pictures or any of that stuff, you can't ever pull it back, and it's going to be out there for everyone to see. I remember someone one time told me don't, I think it was some kind of media training that I was doing or something, but don't say anything that you wouldn't want your mother to read on the headline of the newspaper the next day, right? And so I think that's a pretty good rule to use in life in general, but specifically when we're talking about things that we do online, right? If we look in verse 3, what do we do if we are prudent when we see danger? We hide ourselves from that, right? So there's certainly danger that can be stumbled into completely innocently online, and we got to be able to recognize that stuff and know what our challenges are and our weaknesses are and things that cause us to sin, and make sure that we're removing ourselves from that situation whenever we can. And that's a lot easier said than done, right? Sometimes that can be difficult. And then verse 4 really references humility along the same lines that we talked about in Galatians, just driving home the idea of humility is in a lot of ways contrasted to what a lot of social media is about. Anything else for Proverbs? All right, we'll go to Matthew chapter 5. So Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9. So this one may, not verse 9, 29. Like, that's not right. All right, Matthew 5, 29. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body to be thrown into hell. So what's the sort of guiding principle there, do you think? Tim?
We could read this, rephrase it. If your social media causes you to sin, pluck it out, cast it from you, for it's more profitable for you that one of your social media perish than for your whole life.
Yeah. Sure. If I told a teenager to do that, it would seem like a very extreme step to take, right? But that's, I think, what the point that Jesus is making here, and what he's trying to communicate is sometimes extreme measures are appropriate and necessary and called for if it keeps us out of trouble. Anybody else? Matthew chapter 5? All right, we'll go to the last one here, Ecclesiastes chapter 12. All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, last couple verses of the book here, verse 13. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So what's our principle there that we can carry forward?
No secrets from God.
Yeah, it may seem like we're anonymous. We are not anonymous, right? God knows everything that we're doing, and we're going to face judgment for those, whether they're good or bad. And so, again, sometimes that can be difficult. Even something as sort of benign as an email that upsets you, and do you fire back inappropriately on that, or do you maybe let that sit for a while and think about it and make sure that your response is reflective of Christ and the values that he wants us to have? Anything else here on Ecclesiastes? Yeah, Tanya?
There's a lot of things in life that we don't have to have to function. Social media is not a have to, and if we don't know how to manage certain things across the age span, that can very much impact our spiritual life. So whether it's envy or self-control, or you have an addiction with something, there's so many things at our fingertips that we can get to. We just have to be mindful of, do I need to spend this amount of time here? Do I need to be here? Especially if you are aware that you're kind of in a fragile state, whatever that may be. Social media is not a hack. It's popular, especially with the kids. Everybody's on it, and this is cute, and this is that. And yet we have studies that show that there's a high prevalence of suicide, there's a high prevalence of depression and anxiety and low self-esteem, which is sometimes amplified by social media.
Yeah, absolutely. We may get to some of that tonight. If we don't cover it tonight, we'll definitely cover a lot of that next week.
I would also say it is a good idea to essentially keep up with the technology a bit, because when I was growing up and the internet exploded, a lot of parents that I knew didn't quite understand what could be done on it,
right,
let alone how do you stop it. And so a lot of younger generation suffer. I mean, and it's everything and anything all of the time. Apathy is a tragedy and boredom is a crime, right? That's essentially what the internet is. And so your ability to set up blocks, you have to understand what it is in order to set up the blocks. It's a sense that keep up with the time so that you can help not only yourself, but for your own kids who are stepping into a world that eventually you have LinkedIn, but you also have probably Microsoft Teams.
Yeah.
Or I've got an Office 365, right? You have to have internet access. You have to interact with people. You can't escape from it. But how do you temper it? How do you understand what is phishing, what is bait, what is trolling, what is everything in order to navigate through your own life now? You can't get away from it completely. So how do you control it?
Yeah, so that's the job of us as parents and grandparents and folks who are trying to help our kids, is to protect them from dangers that oftentimes they're completely unaware of, right? And sometimes that's a lot of work on our part, for sure. All right, so go ahead, Tim.
We have time for one more passage.
Yeah.
Ephesians 4:29 through 32 seems to speak directly to some of the dangers that we can face here.
So that was Ephesians 4:29 through the end of the chapter there, right? So this is great. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, so starting in verse 29, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. So absolutely speaks to our speech, right, which would also carry forward to speech that happens with our fingers on a keyboard as opposed to our mouths.
And I would just add to Tim's from Matthew 12, 36 and 37, that I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak.
Yep.
By your word you will be justified, and by your word you will be condemned. So that's the why. That's the way. That's the what's important. Why is this important? Is that we're going to be held accountable for every keystroke, every word that comes out of our mouth, every opinion that we take. It's that important.
Yeah, so there's lots of passages in the Bible that speak to our speech, right? And so we've got to make sure that we understand in the, in 2025, we can have speech in a lot of different ways, and that all of those should follow the same principles, not just things that we are expressing vocally, for sure. Okay, now we're going to go and look at some charts. All right, so you probably can't, I don't know if you can read the writing on the right-hand side, but basically this, each one of these lines represents a different social media platform, right? And the first hash mark on the bottom is 2014, so this is basically 10 years worth of data. And it's more or less ranked by usage. So YouTube's at the top, Facebook is next, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, LinkedIn, and then there's a bunch of the messaging apps that are at the bottom. The key takeaway that I have when I look at this is they're all going the same direction, right? And it's up. So more and more and more people are using all of these different platforms, right? And certainly if you smash all of that together into one line, it would be significantly steeper than what we see here, right? So at the end of the day, this isn't going away. Just the way that it's designed is to try and get you to spend as much time as possible interacting, right? And that's, that's not, not necessarily suggesting that's enough in and of itself to say that you shouldn't use it, but what I would say is you should go in eyes wide open, completely understanding the goal of the folks who develop these apps. All right, so bunch of information here on this that you probably, I don't know, you may be able to read that. So starting at the top left, so there's just over 5 billion users. And so what that equates to, the red circle underneath that is basically saying there is a user for 64% of the population of Earth, right? So if you think about, there's enough users that there's a user for almost two out of every 3 people that are alive. Babies, people who are old, people who don't have the mental capacity to, right, everybody is included in this. The second set of dots there, the bottom blue one, so 86.6. So that is 90% of the population 18 plus. So get 87, getting really close to 90. It's really difficult to get 87% of people to do anything, right? I would say you'd be hard pressed to say 87% of people, eat every day. That's a huge, huge number. Okay, so if you go over, let's see if, there we go. Yeah, so if you look at this circle, 2 hours and 20 minutes is the average amount of time that people spend daily using social media. So again, that's an average. So if you think, 2 hours and 20 minutes, roughly half of the people using social media are spending more than 2 hours and 20 minutes every day on it. And then this is kind of interesting to break down. This is women, so 45% of the users are women, and 55% are men. So I look at that 2 hours and 21 minutes a day, and I remember as a kid growing up, at least a couple lessons about TV and the amount of time that people spend watching TV, right? So this isn't necessarily brand new, because I think back to how I grew up and at least how things were in my house. Roughly 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night, somebody was sitting around watching a TV program at least a couple of nights a week, right? And I remember lessons on just the amount of time. What if we took, cut our TV time in half and spent that in Bible study instead? So again, it's not a new concept. The medium and the vehicle has changed, and it's definitely a little different than it was just sitting there, consuming entertainment products. But generally speaking, I think it's not as radically different as sometimes we think. At least when we look at that average number. Okay, so this one you definitely are very unlikely to be able to read, but this is average usage time per user on a monthly basis. And so TikTok is at the top with over an hour a day for the average user for TikTok. And then you drop down. YouTube is pretty close to an hour a day. Then you go down to Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp that are about 30 minutes a day for the average user, and then it falls off fairly significantly from that point. A lot of those other apps are messaging apps, so it's not something that you're staring at all day. You're on sending a message, kicking it on down the road. Okay, so just kind of a general question. In your mind, why does social media exist? What is the purpose? Why is it attractive to people if you use social media? Why? Not that you have to justify it, right? But how would you explain yourself that you decide to use social media? What's the appeal? And what is good at it? So I thought I had a build in there, but I gave you at least a couple of answers on that. But what else? What are your thoughts on why and the good parts?
Well, there's nothing new under the sun. Why was the newspaper successful? Why was that created in the first place? It was created to inform people, let people know, and then it eventually diverged because everybody read it, so people put advertisements, and then in order to get more views in the paper, they started putting stories. In order to get more stories, they went around trying to find the most crazy thing they could find to get shock value so that you'd read them more. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It all started as your ability to log on and see what's happening in the world. And then it just divulged from there, and then there's money involved. And then you start trying to get people to access your site by putting more gotcha stuff on there. Oh, look at this, look at this.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not a good place.
Yeah. So communication, right, is a way, newspapers and a lot of different things start. Certainly social media is a way to communicate with people. Ricardo?
Well, I use YouTube to listen to music.
Yeah. You can literally learn how to do anything on YouTube. I mean, I've learned how to build a chicken coop and how to diagnose problems with cars and fix cars and all kinds of crazy stuff. You can learn how to do anything on YouTube. You got to be careful sometimes, following guidelines of anonymous people online. But you can learn a ton of information, right? The internet has the recorded wisdom of all humanity that is available there for you, and there's certainly some value in that. Kyle?
This question makes me think about the philosophers that Paul encountered in Acts 17, where it says that all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing.
Yep.
It's always human tendency, I think, for us to be seeking something new, and whether it's the newspaper of old or now social media, that sort of satisfies that craving that we want to learn something or hear something new or be able to tell something new. I think that's one of the fundamental reasons it does.
Yeah, I mean, we're social creatures by nature, and so we want to know what's going on and have stuff to talk about and all those kinds of things, right? For sure. Anybody else got any other answers? Yeah, so most of these we've already covered, right? So you can learn how to do all kinds of stuff. Maintain connections with friends and family. So that was one of the, when you go back and if you look at the initial reason why Facebook started to grow, it was because, hey, I can keep up with people that I wouldn't normally be able to keep up with, right? Used to you had to write letters back and forth, and if you're like me, you're not very good at putting forth that amount of effort to keep up with people sometimes, and so this made it a whole lot easier, right? And it is nice to be able to keep in touch with people. If you've moved around some from other places that you lived or other jobs or that you've had in the past, or maybe family members that are across the country, all of that stuff is certainly good and helpful. We have the opportunity to ask for prayers. We can certainly do that here, but a wider community. If we're having difficulties in our lives, we can let people know what's going on and ask for prayers. We can see requests for people in, other parts of the world that maybe we wouldn't see or know about if it wasn't for some of these social media platforms, and we can pray for them and let them know that we're thinking about them and praying for them and offer support. I meant to ask Cody what our West Main statistics were, and I forgot until just now, but, we use social media here. Why? Because we have access to billions, literally billions of lost souls, people who would never otherwise be exposed to the gospel and New Testament Christianity and what Jesus is really about. And so, we've got the ability to communicate that in just an unprecedented size and scope and reach. TexasBibleStudy.com, right? We use that as an avenue for people who are wanting to learn more and yearning for God's Word. So there's certainly good tools out there that exist. So more charts. Top uses for social media. At the top there is keeping in touch with friends and family. You go down, filling spare time, reading news stories, finding content. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Seeing what's being talked about. Interesting, there's several things on here that have to do with buying things. Finding products to purchase. The last one is seeing content from your favorite brands. There's sports, there's live streams, there's inspiration for things to do and buy again, right? So there's a lot of commerce that is being driven by social media for better or worse. And then here's a breakdown, sort of by, not necessarily by demographic, but by age group, I guess. And so one of the things that you will notice is there's it's not as noticeable in this particular format, but there's a pretty significant difference in the way that people under 30 use social media versus people who are over 30 use social media, right? If you think about Generation Z, one of the original names that they were given was the I Gen. And it's not because of, like, I isn't about me. It's because that's the first group that grew up in having the iPhone being invented when they were very young. So essentially, all of their life, this has existed, right? The ability to have all of the information in your pocket, the ability to have video phone calls, right? So just the way that they interact with that's a lot different than those of us who are a little more seasoned, let's say. One of the things that I learned about that I didn't even know, reading about stuff for this, was with certainly that youngest group, 13 to 17, they go to TikTok to search as opposed to Google, right? So it's very different. And why that matters, we'll talk about here in a couple of questions. Okay, so I break the problems or issues in my mind really break down in four different areas. We're only going to cover the first one tonight, and that's time, right? So we've talked about addiction, we've talked about overuse, okay? The next category is attention. So you can get in this echo chamber where you click on a couple things and the algorithm starts feeding you that over and over and over and over and over again, right? So if you ever watch the cat video and all of a sudden everything you get is a cat video, that can work in a lot of different ways. Just the general problem with content. So there's a lot of worldliness, some of the stuff that Ryan talked about last week with bullying, and then certainly there's exposure to inappropriate content of a number of different flavors. And then I have the last one, persuasion, right? So I think everyone's heard misinformation and fake news, and typically that's talked about from a political perspective, but there's also misinformation and fake news from a religious perspective, or a doctrinal perspective, or, hey, this is what the Bible says, misinformation and fake news, and then just the general perception that people put out there on their life, right? Rarely do you see the difficult days and the hard stuff and, people's houses and stuff when it's a disaster. You see it always at its best. And so certainly for young kids, that can slant their perspective of the world. All right, so try and tackle time here tonight. We got about 10 minutes left. So, like I mentioned before, social media companies, what they are vying for is your time and your attention. Really, it's built in a way to keep you there and for you to bring friends there with you, right? That's really the job. If you've never watched The Social Dilemma, it's not really a documentary, I don't know what you would call it, but it's on Netflix. It's worth your time to go and watch that if you never have. Basically, there's several people from very large tech companies who worked on a lot of this stuff who started having ethical concerns and said, we are developing this and we are seeing problems and the problems are not being addressed, right? And they kind of go and outline some of the challenges and difficulties and things that they tried to fix. There is an organization, I don't remember the exact name of it, but basically digital ethics is what they're driving at, and it's a lot of these people from different places. So there's a couple of interesting things that they all say. They ask them, do you let your kids use social media? Every single one of them said no. Absolutely not. Under any circumstances. And they're the ones who built it, right? They're the ones who know how it works and how it's designed. Would you let your kids use it? Absolutely not. One of the guys that is in that Social Dilemma movie, I'm not sure what to call it, he wrote a book. I think Ben has referenced this before in a sermon, but the book is called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. Okay, and the point that he makes, one of the points that he makes in that book, and one of the points that he makes in the Netflix show, is the way that he defines the product for a social media company is not just your attention, but it is the small, imperceptible changes in your behavior that happen. Right? So just stop and think about that for a second. Okay? What's being marketed and what's being sold, right? Their product is their ability to change what we do. So that could be good, right? That if there's a bad habit or something that you were changing to something better, that would be positive. So that's not necessarily bad in and of itself, but just again, go into it, especially with our kids, eyes wide open on understanding, one of the goals through advertising is to try and change our behavior, get you to stay there longer and longer and get you to bring other people with you and modify your behavior, right? So I have Ephesians chapter 15, or chapter 5, verse 15 written up here. So look carefully how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of time, right? Because the days are evil. So Paul's plea for them is to make the best use of their time and to take advantage of it, make the best of it. So casino strategies, right? A lot of not just social media apps, but a lot of digital apps incorporate human behavior patterns that have been learned from people who build casinos. Bright lights, lots of colors, sounds. Bright lights and sounds together are especially powerful. All of those things that's how the apps are built. They are built like a casino to draw you in and get you to stay there. Infinite scroll, right? You never get to the end. You can keep going forever and ever and ever, and there's going to continue to be things that show up. There's never a, that's it, you've seen everything, you can put it down and walk away. It's always there. So what a lot of this results in is these dopamine hits, right? So dopamine is the thing in our brain that says, hey, that's something that I should do, okay? So God gave us that in times of scarcity, right? When we eat, hey, that's really good, but it doesn't last forever, okay? Then that dopamine goes away. Okay, I got to go find something else to eat again, and let me start working on that now, rather than going and taking a nap, right? So there's this dopamine is kind of a survival drive that we have, and the problem in the situation we have now is we live in abundance. So we're not having to worry about food and staying alive and those kinds of things, and so it. We get those dopamine hits from different places. There are, so I'm going to quote this exactly. So, according to a pilot study, adolescents with internet addiction disorder have significantly higher plasma dopamine levels compared to healthy controls. In other words, people who don't have internet addiction disorder. Activities such as online gaming, social networking, and web browsing frequently produce instant pleasure and continuous novelty, continually triggering the reward system in the brain with dopamine, right? So these dopamine surges can create a powerful compulsion, leading to behaviors that resemble addiction. Although basically it's not a physical addiction, it's a mental addiction. I was at a conference last fall with a guy who was kind of on the ground floor of ChatGPT talking about AI, and he said, our cell phones are more addictive than cigarettes. So think about that, right? It's addictive in a different way, but our cell phones are more addictive than cigarettes. All right, so with all that being said, how do I help my child manage the time that they spend on social or any digital media, right? So practical strategies, those of you that are kind of in the middle of it, or house rules or anything else that you're doing that might be helpful to somebody else. Anybody want to volunteer? Be brave. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we do. The first thing we've already covered is our kids don't have to have a cell phone and they don't have to have social media, right? Again, I didn't put it in here, but another quote, if you give a unrestricted phone to a kid under 16 years old, it's roughly the equivalent of handing them a loaded gun and say, hey, here you go. Some of them are going to be responsible and understand what that means and conduct themselves appropriately, right? Others are going to be curious. What happens when I pull the trigger? What happens when I do this, right? And some are just going to be careless about it because they really don't understand how it works and what the power is in all of that, right? So kids don't have to have a phone. Kids certainly don't have to have social media, right? Phone fasting is a thing that's out there, believe it or not. So, it could be something as simple as, hey, nobody has their phone out at the dinner table, right? Parents included, right? And we engage and we talk, because really that's one of the antidotes to all of this is balance, right? So all of us spend a lot of time online. I work from home. Like Sean said, I'm always on on my computer talking to people for work. We got to have that balanced out with in-person conversations and time outside and doing other activities. So this is one that I picked up a couple of years ago that has really been useful to me. So I don't know about you Android people, but if you have an iPhone, so I'll hold it up and you can see my kind of blue screen. If I triple click the power button, it's black and white. So specifically, with apps like Instagram that are very visually appealing. When you turn it to black and white, it becomes much less visually appealing. Almost to the point where it's like, okay, it's very tempting to immediately just click it back because it's not nearly as nice to look at. But it's incredibly helpful, right? What you find is that you don't spend nearly as much time just sitting there staring, kind of scrolling away, and then all of a sudden it's, 20 or 30 minutes have gone away or whatever. Certainly no cell phones before bed. There's a lot of different rules. So all of our kids' bedrooms are upstairs, so generally the rule that we have at home is the phones don't go upstairs, right? They stay downstairs. Some are better at following that than others. We have to remind them from time to time, but anything that you can set where there's boundaries and, hey, this is what's acceptable, this is what's not, to try and build in some routine and some break from the phone is going to be extremely helpful. Anybody else got any other comments or strategies that they have employed? Lori?
Just real quick, this one was real helpful to me, Chris. There's a website called Protect Young Eyes, and for those of us that don't have the time to research every single app out there, this has all the social media apps, including YouTube, Discord, Instagram, TikTok, all of it. And the premise of Protect Young Eyes is keep them off social media as long as possible. But when you are ready for them to have a certain app, it's the guide for the parent to go to and say, okay, what is this app really like? And it gives you steps on what kind of filter should you put on it? What should you be aware of as a parent because of that app? So it was really handy. It's kind of like, I kind of equivalent it to if you wanted to go review a movie to see how many bad words are in the movie or if they're sexy. It's the same thing, except it's for social media.
Interesting.
So it's
Okay.
really helpful to us.
Tony?
I was just going to say, one thing that I did when the boys were young, we also had the rule of they had to have their cell phones charged in overnight with us. I also did random checks on the phone. I'd just be hand me your phone, and I'd just scroll through texts.
Yeah.
And there were some conversations that happened from that, and they didn't like it, but too bad. We were paying for the phone.
Yeah.
We had some good conversations, and I think that's important because your kids are tempted by other kids, and they get sucked into things, or they're getting things from other kids, and you really learn a lot by doing that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, thank you very much. We'll keep it going next week. Thanks for the comments.